Welcome to the Affirming Village podcast, where we center neurodivergent voices, affirm diverse ways of being, and empower families, educators, and advocates with knowledge that truly honors the whole learner. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff, a late diagnosed autistic ADHD mental health therapist and non-attorney special education advocate, and Lisa Baskin-Wright, an ADHD and dyslexic educator and IEP coach. Together, we dig into conversations about neuroaffirming practices, special education, and disability rights. Please remember, nothing shared on this podcast is medical or legal advice, and the views shared here by the host and the guest are their personal opinions. This space is for educational purposes only, to help you feel informed, empowered, and never alone in the village. Welcome back to the Affirming Village podcast, where inclusion is intentional, neurodiversity is honored, and advocacy is rooted in dignity.
We are your hosts, Lisa and Destiny, and we are so glad that you are here. This is a space for parents, educators, service providers, and advocates who are committed to creating environments where neurodivergent and disabled children feel safe, supported, and truly seen.
So today's conversation feels long overdue since from when we've seen it. But today's conversation is coming from a recent reel that was posted by an educator that talked about saying no to inclusion. And we've been reflecting on it. We've made posts about it, and we want to come on and really expound more on our thoughts and views on it and how that can be particularly damaging. So, because while we understand the exhaustion behind statements like that, we believe there's deeper nuance that really deserves attention.
Yeah, for us, inclusion is not optional. It's necessary. It's a civil rights issue, and it's about belonging, access, and equity.
But what we can't ignore are the systemic breakdowns that make inclusion feel impossible. Like there's a lack of funding, a lack of adequate pay, a lack of staffing, a lack of professional development on neuroaffirming practices and disabilities. All things that matter in this context.
Exactly. So when educators are underpaid and undersupported and they're overwhelmed, of course, inclusion can feel like an impossible demand. And that's not a teacher failure, that's a systems failure.
So today we're unpacking that. How do we hold the truth that inclusion is necessary while also naming the structural barriers that are sabotaging it?
Because here in the Affirming Village, we get curious about behavior instead of rushing to control it. We believe belonging should never require masking, and support should never come at the expense of a child's nervous system.
So whether you're at the IEP table, in the classroom, in your therapy office, or at home navigating this journey, you're part of this village.
Let's get into today's episode.
I am going to let Lisa start. She saw this reel and sent it to me, and, we commiserated over it. And then we both had the same thought process, which is that we need to talk about this on the podcast because, there's levels to it. And on social media, we could only really give a snapshot.
Exactly. Yeah. So about a week ago, I saw this reel and it was late at night and I'd had a really long and stressful day where I really, I'd had a meeting where I felt like the humanity of the learner had not fully been seen by a particular member on the team. And they were really trying to sabotage his access and gaslight the family into allowing this to happen. So I was already kind of in my feels and low bandwidth and all the things, and made the mistake of going onto Instagram at 11 something at night, and happened to see this reel in the stories of a fellow advocate who had questions and I think was having a similar reaction. And so I watched this thing, and it was a really animated, now in hindsight, I think kind of rage baity type reel, where it was a general education teacher kind of, loud volume, make it make sense. Like, this is not fair to educators and general educators and general education students, and special education students essentially need to be segregated out. And it was a really like us, them, they don't belong messaging. And that essentially learners who receive, and the other piece that was a part of it was this messaging that like um, IEPs and 504s are the same thing. Like there was a nuance kind of missing
Mm-hmm.
in the reel as well, but that those learners all sort of clumped together as one need to be educated in a separate space because they're essentially ruining the experience of those who deserve to be there. And I'm paraphrasing, but that was the messaging.
Mm-hmm.
And I never, and I mean never, comment on people's stuff that I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not interested in engaging with strangers on the internet. I think I'm too old for that shit. But apparently,
Right, right.
apparently, I am not too old for that shit when I am really low on bandwidth because I did
Yeah.
engage. And the second I hit enter or post or whatever, the arrow, I thought that wasn't maybe your best move because it's like 11:30 at night and I had a 7 a.m. meeting the next day and like a full schedule the next day. And I just knew I was going to wake up to a flurry of nonsense. And I did. So at least it was predictable. But one of the things that really caught my attention, and Destiny and I were talking about this, and I think it did for her as well, is it just didn't feel isolated, right? It wasn't just one teacher's voice having a moment of distress and frustration. It this I'll call her a creator because she's got a page that
Large
has like a
platform.
hundred and something thousand followers. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a she's got a substantial platform.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it wasn't just her perspective or her voice that I found troublesome. It was that like all the comments were like, say it louder for those in back, right? Like it was very much so an echo chamber of many, many, many voices, many of whom were self-proclaimed educators. So I'll take them at their word, right? I've been in the classroom for X amount of year, right? And a lot of folks have been in the classroom for a long time, both self-identified as general ed and as special ed, and there was sort of this uniformity of thought that what this person was putting out there was accurate and truthful and what we should be doing. And that I think is what really got under my skin. And I think that's why at 11 something at night I made the decision I never make, which was to put something that was counter to that narrative for somebody to consider, which is ironic because I am so not a teach them a lesson kind of a person. And like nobody learns anything in the comment section. So I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I did it anyway. But it did give Destiny and I something to commiserate over for sure.
No, and I think if you're watching this episode on YouTube, you can see my visible dysregulation. Um, because I know I have families that have followed me for a while that, were in my inbox like, that was so incredibly disheartening. And I saw comments from parents that were saying, like, this is how we already feel like you think about our kids. And to say it out loud and to see all these people agreeing, um, to have a child in full gen ed, on an IEP, thriving and successful, and have educators around him who are supportive of him and helping him be successful, that should be everyone's experience. And I think a lot of times we attack the vulnerable instead of the system because it's just easier. It's easier to say they're keeping me from this and they're
Exactly.
keeping me from doing this and they're upsetting this and this is happening, right? Because I can't get mad at my district's funding. I can't get mad at where my congressman decides to put our funds. I can't get mad at our superintendent making 7 times what I make, but I'm buying my own supplies or doing wish lists on Amazon. I can't get mad at my administrator who takes a child out of the classroom, gives them a lollipop, and sends them back in, and basically tells me that this learner has an IEP, so I have to suck it up. And we know these are things that are happening, right?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
instead, I just go, well, if this kid wasn't in my class, if I didn't have to deal with this, right, I wouldn't have these problems. And so, again, as Lisa and I have talked about, my mother and sister are educators. And so I'm very familiar with the different ways in which we view different things. And I think for me, what was very upsetting about this reel and the comments was one, that the creator was a Black creator, and me being Black and the history of segregation. It was really triggering in that regard of we are the first ones segregated. And so you're talking about these Black and brown babies, and they're going to be the first ones to get segregated from your they don't need to be included. The other side is that there is often, I find that stepping into IEP meetings, there is often a lack of understanding of what special education is. There's often a lack of understanding of what 504s are. There's a lack of understanding in how they are separate. There's a lack of understanding in how accommodations and specifically designed instruction or specialized academic instruction is applied. So there's so many layers to it. And so to see the narrative repeated in the comments for me just further to me that ignorance that exists and that has continued to be perpetuated, and actually does make it harder for educators who do want to be neuroaffirming, who do want to create these inclusive classrooms. And it was just really, as a parent again, and as a disabled individual, just very disheartening.
Yeah. And I think I don't know her and I don't know her classroom or her school situation.
Which is why we're
Um,
not saying like names or anything
I
like that. We're
couldn't.
not
I
gonna
don't
get,
remember it.
yeah, I don't
I
either.
don't think I.
But we're not calling out a person, we're calling out a issue that we see in our practice as
Oh,
advocates and
100%.
as parents and
Yeah,
professionals.
absolutely. And the practice that I see, and I think the issue that's getting a little bit conflated is the idea of inclusion versus sort of the structural design of how, like, there's like inclusive classrooms, right? So the way that it often plays out in practice is, just I'll use an elementary school as an example. A larger elementary school that has multiple classrooms at each grade, right? So there's maybe 3 classrooms per grade, and
Mm-hmm.
that the school will designate 1 classroom per grade as the quote unquote inclusion classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll throw a paraprofessional into that classroom, wash their hands, and call it good. So you create these scenarios at a systems level
Mm-hmm.
where the learners who have IEPs or 504s are placed in Miss Wright's classroom because she's our second grade inclusion classroom teacher.
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough learners to, like, make up a whole class,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also considered general ed, like on the books. And
Mm-hmm.
so, of course, there's a disproportionate number of learners who have more barriers to access in the space. But what it also does is it creates a scenario where, at the individual level, in terms of the families of those learners, when
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to advocate for support, they're often met with a no
Mm-hmm.
because they're in the quote unquote inclusion classroom. So that's already built into the system. So,
Mm-hmm.
no, we're not going to provide paraprofessional support. There's already a classroom para, right? Oh, no, we don't need to write that down in the IEP, that accommodation. That's already part of, right? And so when I was a mentor for beginning teachers, one of my 4th grade teachers was the quote unquote inclusion teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a class of high 20s. I don't remember the exact number, like 28, 29, whatever it was. And I would say about half the class were learners who received special education services.
Mm-hmm.
And her counterpart in the special education department, bless her heart and soul, was not really a team player.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Okay, I remember talking about this. Yeah.
And so the teacher I was supporting, who was the general education teacher, was definitely like the show up and give a shit type of a person.
Right, right.
But she also was like, I want to be collegial and collaborative with my colleague, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to step on her toes, and I have no training in this. So I'm more than happy to like try my hand at making the visual or right like creating whatever the tool is that this young person needs.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if I'm supposed to do it. I don't know if she's supposed to do it. I don't really have a relationship with her to kind of ask her, and I don't want to step on toes because she's really like kind of feline, like these are my kids, not yours, except
Mm-hmm.
they're ours. And right, like it was really, as my cousin would say, like kind of walking in eggshells and in stilettos. Like, you know, and the teacher I was working with knew that it was creating a poorer outcome for the
Mm-hmm.
learners in her classroom, that they weren't getting what they rightfully needed and deserved and were like legally entitled to. But there was like all this stuff happening behind the scenes. So like structurally creating a like designated classroom, I think is causing a lot of these problems,
Mm-hmm.
but we're then creating sort of a mindset or a narrative. We're feeding a narrative of like, well, inclusion itself is bad. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really like how the design is being implemented.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as unfortunately most things are, it's dollars driven,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's cheaper to designate one classroom with the additional personnel and like wash your hands and call it good than it is to have every single classroom in your school an inclusive space, and that the
Mm-hmm.
supports are dynamic and variable based on individual need in the room.
Absolutely. And I think what you're talking about too is think about when we start looking at, I had a learner recently where they're getting a lot of breaks to go to sensory rooms. And so the concept that their school does not actually have what would be considered a self-contained type setting. And so, but they will next year. And so, some of the conversation that was brought up is that some of the things that the learner is accessing, they could regularly access in that setting. And so, we also see that side of it where we have, we kind of look at general education classrooms as an academic basis. We look at self contained classrooms as a regulation sensory basis, and so then we don't actually understand what inclusion looks like in incorporating the two. And so we'll have families that are maybe resistant to their learner going to a self contained setting because, will they get access to the academic side where I know they are capable? And we'll have educators who are like, they are totally capable academically, but they're not accessing the setting because they need the sensory regulation side that comes with that room. And we haven't figured out how to make them coexist.
Right.
Even when we talk about middle and high school, that's where we'll typically see, and I've seen a few in elementary, but I mainly see co-taught classrooms in middle and high school.
Right.
And the concept of the co-taught classroom is you have a general educator and you have a special educator. And as I always tell my parents, how it's supposed to run is the special educator does their lesson, and then whatever accommodations and things are connected to that learner's IEP, then the special educator is doing that, whether it's that small group or if they're doing there's a scribe, whatever that piece is that they're supposed to be providing in that setting. And what can sometimes happen with that even is that the special education teacher becomes a co-teacher for the gen ed teacher with access to all the learners, because we don't always have learners that are identified, but we can see where there are disabilities and disconnects and barriers, right? And so I think you hit it like spot on, and we're just coming at it from those different angles of just like inclusion. True inclusion really involves adjusting the environment. And currently, inclusion is, I put this disabled learner in your class, I'm being inclusive. And that's not
Right.
what inclusion is.
No, no. And one of the pieces that was lifted up in that reel and in the comment section and in lots of spaces, actually, it just was a big highlight, is the misnomer that like special education students aren't general education students. Like they're somehow like two totally distinct and separate groups. And that is false. I don't care where a learner is placed, all students are general education students. Some students receive special education services, and some of those students receive those special education student services in a different or separate location. Right. And there's a whole, like the full continuum of placements, right? From least restrictive to most restrictive, there's a whole continuum where that can happen. But I don't even care if you are a learner that's placed in residential, you are technically a general education student receiving special education services in a highly restrictive environment. And so that piece gets lost. And one of the things that I mean, because I ruminated, of course I did, and my bestie Insomnia joined me because we're like attached at the hip of this question. And I think that this goes beyond um, sort of this real and this specific conversation. I found us talking about this and me wondering about this, and lots of folks wondering about this with all of RFK's nonsense. Is where are you drawing the line and how are you determining that? Right? Who gets to decide who is worthy of an education and who is not? And what are you basing that on? And I think you started to touch on this earlier that far too often it's our Black and brown learners, especially if there's a misunderstanding of nervous system dysregulation, so quote unquote behavior. There's a misunderstanding of intellect, right? Those kids are going to be the first ones that are segregated out. And so we've then decided in certain situations as early as 3 years old, you are not worthy of a real education. You are going over here and you are getting limited access. And nobody really wants to talk about it because it's not PC, but that's the real information. The real information is that we decide at 3 years old who is going to go into a segregated space and who is not. And once you get put on that track, it is not impossible, but it's real close to impossible to get kids out of that track and into the mainstream. And then you've created this scenario where not all, because nothing is binary, but too many general education teachers and staff and administrators don't understand that all students are general education students. And so they're like seen as a visitor in the space instead of a valued and equal member of the community.
100%. Like, well, only our special education students do, or that's only non-special education, or that's, I mean, I've had conversations since I've become an advocate with parents where we're talking about their 3-year-old or their 4-year-old not being on a diploma track. And I'm like, put it in black and white. Oh, well, because it's practice, it's not policy, right? And I'm just gonna say it. Like, there should be shame. I am not big on shaming and guilting at all by any means. But there should be some sense of shame in already saying a 3 or 4-year-old is not gonna get a high school diploma. And I'm coming from that of a standpoint of when the educational system has already presumed what this learner is capable of. And it's just based on and what I've seen often, you know, because I know there's going to be a parent out here listening, well, my learner has these multiple disabilities and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And see, I'm not disregarding that. But in these cases where I've seen this, it's almost automatically, oh, you have a non-speaking autistic learner. Oh, you have a learner who is is significantly, whatever that means, ADHD, and they can't sit and concentrate and focus, and so they can't access the curriculum, and we don't know what they're capable of presenting. Oh, you have a learner that has struggles with articulation and receptive and expressive language, and so we're just not sure how, right? So they're pretty much already starting off saying, which they don't want to say, but they're alluding to, like, we can't help your learner, and so we don't think going through our education system they are going to accomplish or achieve this goal. And it's just so disheartening. And it just goes back to when we were talking about those bigger systems and structures, and we talk about inclusion, but also how special education, and me and my sister have talked about this often from when we were growing up, like it went from those students, because I was not in special education, I'm late diagnosed, and then you didn't really see them. And then as time has gone on, you started to see them. And, going back to that civil rights part and how disability advocates for years, and they were like, no, we deserve to be seen. We deserve to have access. We deserve these things. And so, but the schools, I think, have historically framed that to staff as this is something we legally have to do. And then subsequently, they don't back it up with the nuances and approaches and trainings and adjustments that can make it successful, because they don't want to do it. And so they turn it into a situation of, we have to do this. And I can't tell you how many times I have talked to educators who are reaching out for support, who are parents, who are like, now I get what my families were saying. I just thought I'm being forced to do X, Y, and Z. The school's doing everything they can. And then come to find out they're playing both sides of the fence. And so I'm upset, blaming the parent for what they're not doing to get their child school ready and prepared and be in this environment. The parent's upset with me for what I'm not doing to help their learner feel safe and regulated and educated in this environment. And then the people at the top are just like, well, that's just how it goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure, when we were on our personal journey,
Mm-hmm.
there is a dynamic of like, it kind of helps the folks at the top not to throw district administrators like under the bus. Um, but if there's an adversarial relationship between kind of the school-based staff or the teachers in particular and the parents, and we've set up this dynamic, it deflects where the real blame kind of belongs. And I'm not even saying that the district administrator themselves has full control over this, right? Because they're working within their county, and then they're working within their state, and like the IDEA has never been fully funded, right? So like the can just keeps getting kind of kicked down the road,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a deflection.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a mindset, it's like there's this historical pattern that keeps repeating, right? And so, and it feels like we had swung the pendulum a little bit
Mm-hmm.
towards a more inclusive mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And, that there was some measurable progress there.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels like has swung back under
Mm-hmm.
this current administration and these attacks on 504, and right, like, well, attacks on anybody really that's divergent in any way from a cisgendered white Christian male.
That's correct.
um, Heterosexual. What am I missing? Not much. It's a pretty small box, right?
Pretty much checks all the boxes.
Right. But it's like we're trying to perpetuate this theme that
Mm-hmm.
different is scary and it's
Mm-hmm.
bad and we need to get rid of it. It needs to be cut out and removed. Instead of like, if we had truly meaningful inclusion from the jump
Mm-hmm.
with young learners,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just like, oh, Lisa doesn't communicate using mouth words. That's not what her body does. She's going to take your hand and lead you to what she wants, right? But Lisa likes to laugh, Lisa can dance or whatever, right? Like, and then the 3-year-old Destiny is like, oh, my friend Lisa communicates by taking my hand. Like, Destiny's not going to think that Lisa is scary or weird or whatever. She's
And
just like,
don't
that's
care. And
Lisa's
don't
doing
care.
Lisa and I'm doing me, right?
Right.
Like, and we're doing it together, right? Like, but when we say, like when we deny accommodations, especially with young learners, or we segregate out young learners, or, oh, it's not the best thing for them, we're perpetuating that like societal cycle of harm because we're seeing the disabled learner as a problem who doesn't add value to the space. And that is absolutely false. All learners that enter a classroom add value. And my like preachy soapbox self is like, if you don't like feel that in your soul, you shouldn't be in a classroom. And I know that it's not a shared belief, and that makes me really sad.
Absolutely. I mean, I think societally and at a human level, right? We really, unfortunately, a lot of times people don't understand until they're in it. And like I get, I'll have families I'm supporting and they're like, oh my gosh, where were you 5 years ago? Where were you? And it's like, I wasn't in this space. And it wasn't because I like to think that it wasn't because I didn't have the compassion. It was not something I ever thought I would step into. I never thought, I did not think my son was autistic. I did not know I was autistic. I didn't know enough about autism.
Right.
But I think that's something you have to be upfront about. And one of the things I'm very upfront about, and I always say this, and anyone who's ever heard me say anything knows I say this. I had a stereotypical view of what autism looked like. And I think we have to get better at being comfortable saying that.
Absolutely.
Like, it's okay that you view it differently. I've been in IEP meetings where the staff has said, wow, like, I've never thought about that like that. But no, that makes perfect sense. And they're like, I can see how that would be upsetting. And so, yeah, I can absolutely make this adjustment to this goal.
Right.
Because one of the things I always talk about with Lisa is like, for me, the biggest thing I'm going to get on to you about is going to be multimodal communication and it's going to be social emotional goals. Like, those are going to be, I'm going to pick it apart because it's often based in neurotypical norms and it's often based in how society expects for you to handle situations and completely disregards the neurodivergent individual's perspective. And I don't like that. And I've struggled with that my whole life and come across that in work performance evaluations and things like that, which I look back and I'm like, oh, that's why they were saying that. It was because I'm being straightforward and like, you're not supposed to do that. Like, you're supposed to talk around it or be kinder or say something nice, even though you mean something else. And I don't have time for that. So when you look at like inclusion, that's what it really makes me think of because the way in which the educator, we know this in 2026, is already fighting so many obstacles for their classroom.
Oh yeah.
I know in conversations I have with my sister, like some things we talk about, it's just like it's just another thing, right? Like it's like I have to do this, and this, and then you want me to do this? How am I supposed to do that? And we don't want to discount that. We don't want to ignore the fact that some of the things that were being pointed out in that reel was that basically general education teachers are doing a lot. And they're like, and then on top of that, you're placing a learner in my classroom that I don't have training for, who has specific needs that need to be supported and accommodated, has barriers that need to be removed, and I don't know how to remove them. I'm not trained on them. And I'm getting 5 students added into my already 15 students. Now I've got 20 students, and that doesn't include those that are not diagnosed and identified. And we're not disregarding that. What we're saying is that is a systemic issue, and it's not fair. It is not conscionable, in my opinion,
No, it's not.
put that on the disabled learners, and then to know that their not first advocate is their parent, and they're hearing you say the things that they're worried if I speak up about, you're going to talk about negatively. You're perpetuating ableism, and
Oh,
that's just what it
absolutely.
is.
Absolutely. No, I'm thinking of a situation and I'm choosing my words to make sure I don't like disclose any kind of identity, but I know of situations because it's more than one, honestly. I just have one that kind of jumped into my mind immediately where the learner was really struggling in the general education classroom, right? Like there were things happening where where everything that was up was down, right? They were clearing the classroom. They were, right? And in this one situation I'm thinking of, like at some point, the school was like, we cannot educate your learner on this campus. Like, they've got to go. And I remember the parent saying, like, she was just so, like, she felt so badly. And I want to say she was embarrassed, but I don't, she wasn't embarrassed by her child, but like
Right. The situation,
the situation,
the
she
shame
didn't
and guilt.
want to be like the cause of disruption,
Hmm.
right? Like she felt so badly that this was the dynamic that was evolving
Mm-hmm.
that when the school was like, he's got to go and like, you need to be in like a specialized school and go the non-public route, she was like, okay. And I'm not suggesting that all
Right. Right.
learners can be educated within the general, right? Like, I'm not an all or nothing kind of a person at all.
And I just want to pause and tap in on that really quickly, because one of the number one things that we get told when we do talk about inclusion, and I think Lisa has seen this, I know for every post I've done, I've seen it. If I remotely mention that special ed students can be in gen ed classrooms, it's like, well, everyone doesn't need to be in that. And sometimes that's a big environment. And sometimes it's no shit, Susan. Like, sorry to the Susans that are out there that are inclusive and are
That's
hearing
my mom.
this. But no, your mom's gonna be like, "What did I do to Destiny?" Because I love Lisa's mom. Never met her, but I love her. But no, it's like it's so upsetting because it's like obviously the
Right.
setting is not for all. Like, for example, I've had older learners that are just straight up like, it's too much noise in that room for me. I will go sit in the special education classroom for my math. I don't care. Because they're like,
Right.
it's too overstimulating for me.
100%.
Cool. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there's certain things that just because of the nature of a school setting, the support that would fit into that setting may not benefit that learner, right? So, like, my son doesn't like being in the cafeteria, it's too loud. He's like, I'd rather eat in my special education classroom with my other peers. Headphones don't work for me because I don't have anything going in the headphones, so it's not drowning it out for me.
Right.
Cool. We're understanding in that, and that is fine, right? And so it's like, we're not saying that every learner can be safe and successful in the gen ed setting if that does not fit their unique profile. What we are saying is that you don't get to not adjust the environment and provide supports and automatically assume that because of their category or disability.
That part. And I know I've disclosed this like privately, but I don't know if I've ever disclosed this publicly. Maybe I have. My daughter was in 11 different placements,
Mm-hmm.
from home to gen ed with minimal support to gen ed with maximum support to non-public school to, right, like all over the place. Um, and so what is necessary or most appropriate, for lack of a better word, in one season of life isn't necessarily what's most appropriate or the best fit in a different season, right? Like, so there's that part too. But you just hit on what I was kind of the path I was going on, which is I think parents sometimes find themselves in situations where their child has been sort of labeled as the quote unquote problem,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the target of that video,
Mm-hmm.
right? and they feel so guilty and so overwhelmed and so concerned, and they have a sense of shame or embarrassment or whatever, that
Mhm.
instead of asking the questions around, like, well, what is the support looking like and what accommodations are in place, and have we set them up for success? Do they need more direct support? Do we need to look at their schedule and see what makes the most sense? Right? Like, I'm not ruling anything in or out. But
Mhm.
have we sort of exhausted all options? Do we understand who this learner is as a human and what, like, best accommodates and supports them as an individual? And oftentimes the answer is no. We just automatically, like, autism, you go into this special day class over here, that's our autism classroom, right? Or, oh, you're a big problem and we've tried for 5 minutes, so you're going, right? Like, and going to a non-public school is obviously like a bigger deal just because there's a lot of
Mhm.
dollars and cents associated with that. So teams won't necessarily jump to that place as quickly. But there is a jump to segregation quickly.
Mhm.
And there is also a jump. I'm like thinking of an email I literally just got before we came on to record, where the administration has decided this kid is not a good kid and they are stuck on discipline. And I am stuck on make it stop. Um,
But I think a big piece that you're talking about, though, is like we expect more capacity and regulation out of disabled children
yes,
than we require out of able bodied adults.
that is correct.
And so, one of the things I've talked about on this podcast before, and I've talked about with Lisa many times, is that early on in my son's educational career, when we were trying to figure out what was going on, um, I was very dysregulated, right? I was getting these calls, it was back to back. I was anxious with that anticipatory anxiety going into it. I was nervous. I was worried. Like, how's this day gonna be? He's nervous and he's worried. He's throwing up. We're like thinking, like, did he eat something? Is it like how mommy drives?
You're like all the
like,
above. No,
like what
okay.
like what's going on? And then looking back,
Sweet
it's
boy.
like it was anxiety
Yes.
because he was putting so much pressure on himself as a 5-year old to
Yeah.
have a good day. And if you're not seeing this on YouTube, I'm doing hand quotes, good day. And what I would realize is that once the call was done, or I was up there, or he was home, or he had a quote unquote good day, whatever the fuck that means, um,
Your guess is as good as mine.
I was like, wait a minute. Now that I'm regulated and I'm taking a step back, I'm able to really look and go, what happened today? What happened yesterday?
Right.
What was relayed to me? Where do I have questions? And one of the things to me, when you're in a habitual cycle, first of all, as parents, we don't get a lot of downtime. Okay. Like your brain is going, going, going. And what I've learned from my friends, such as Lisa, when your children become adults, they're less on the ground with you, and that's a different level of anxiety, about wanting to make sure they're okay. But on the other side of that, educators, right, theoretically, go, go, go
Yep.
until that summer vacation,
Right. And then they
right?
collapse.
Assuming they don't have summer school, or they don't do ESY, or they don't have a summer job. Um, and I
That
know that my
that
sister
part.
did for years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, her rest was just, I'm not in a classroom full of children, right?
Right.
So, because of that, there's this perpetual dysregulation cycle.
Yes.
And you're constantly going into that nervous system, your fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop. You're currently hitting into all those areas. Yes. So,
I'm a flop.
working on a presentation today, I'm working on a presentation, and I had remembered there's one that I'm missing that I had heard recently that wasn't there when I first learned about fight, flight, freeze, or fawn back in grad school, which was over a decade ago. And it was flop. And flop is just that collapse. That's what it is. And Lisa
That
and
is me.
I have, like, been friends for a short enough time through rough enough periods at this point to have seen each other on that exhaustion piece. Because I almost said a long time, but it hasn't been a long time. But we've just been
We
through
just
a
knew each
lot of
other in a previous life.
things.
That's all.
I'm thoroughly convinced.
I'm
Um,
old enough to have known you through multiple of your lives.
that's why I always forget your age, and you're like, "Ma'am," and I'm like, "Sorry." But it's like they go through that too. And I think systems really do play on that dysregulation.
Yes.
And so a lot of the educators I come across that reach out, that ask questions, that I support, that are my families I support, they really talk about how they had a different view of essentially inclusion and
Right.
access and
Yeah.
equity before their own child. And not because they were bad people,
No, if
because
something's not
they,
on your radar.
right, they just didn't have the exposure, the understanding, and they were being told you have to do this or that. I saw something the other day that was like, if they tell me to collect data one more time. And I was like laughing because I was like, I have seen where like data collection is being done by the staff, but it's not the right data or it's not helpful
Right.
data. And so they don't know that. And then they go, here's all this data we have. And then they're like, oh, but we need to check boxes because there's an advocate coming. And so we need to do this the right way. And so you need to collect this kind of data. And it's like, but you could have already shared that. You knew the issues and struggles they were having, but you chose not to. And that's how we pit it against each other. So I think that's that systemic level impact. And when we're talking about inclusion, a big piece of that with the lack of funding and the lack of pay and, you know, the lack of support and going into the classrooms and the too large class sizes. Is also that regulation and capacity piece. And we are giving learners who don't have regulation and capacity to educators who are trying to manage 25 regulation and capacities.
Yeah, no, I don't want anybody to come away from this like we're doomed.
I know, right? How do we spin it back?
Right. I'm like, how do we rein it in? No, I mean, I think that you're tapping into something though that's really important and grounding and humanizing, which is we can recognize the humanity in the educators. We can see
Mm-hmm.
their dysregulation and hold space for it, right? If
Mm-hmm.
we're wanting like we can kind of coexist in that space, right? Where we honor and like the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. Like my mom used to have like a yoga teacher that would like say that at the I think that's what namaste means actually. I don't do yoga. It's not active enough. I need to be like
I don't
lifting something
either.
heavy
You
or
know,
like
Pilates is hard though, even though
yeah,
it's
I
not,
can't do
it's
that.
hard.
I can't even touch my knees, let alone my toes. Like I'm made out of steel or wood or something. Like it's terrible. But yeah, I think namaste means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you.
Mm.
Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, which is highly plausible. Um, but just like I think this is a strategy you and I both employ at an IEP table, right? Like this is a strategy we use when we're meeting with families, is that we're just recognizing the humanity of their child,
Mm-hmm.
of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're not necessarily like fixing it. We don't have it's not even the capacity. We don't have the capability to
Right.
fix the systemic issues, but we can lift them up.
Mm-hmm.
We can show up in a way that is really honoring the humanity of the teacher and recognizing the challenges they're facing and say, "Hey, I'm here to be a thought partner with you. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not fighting against you." I realize that some folks are more open to that than other, right? I'm thinking of this administrator that's very busy trying to punish this child. Um, she's not necessarily, we're not going to necessarily move the needle super far with her, but we're gonna try. Um, but I feel like when we can engage in a way where like there isn't, we're not coming in saying I have this expectation of perfection,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? I don't expect the classroom teacher or the special education teacher, if it's a learner that's placed in mainstream, or any particular service provider or administrator, I don't expect any member of the team to be the quote unquote magic bullet and to like get it right every single time.
Mm-hmm.
What I expect is partnership,
Mm-hmm.
curiosity, recognition that my child is a human being who's having a hard time potentially, but not giving you a hard time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I want you to feel safe as a learner yourself in this process,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to say, I'm honestly not quite sure what the next best step is, right? I'm on it, right? Like, I have a situation right now with a non-speaker where like the school anxiety is really like upticked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lovely teacher and it's a lovely classroom, right? And we really truly don't know why. So we
Mm-hmm.
came together with a ton of humility and curiosity and like, can we just put our heads together and wonder and then see what maybe could be plausible and then what accommodation could help solve that potential problem if that's the problem, and then try it, right? Like, we're working together, right? And yeah, I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to like potentially give away identity, but like, the parent and I reconvened the other day and we're like, there's something I missed that I thought of, right? And like, they had a really plausible idea, and it was like, God, how do we not think of this, right? And we had a room full of folks and like none of us thought of this particular piece. And when she said it, I was like, oh my God, I bet that's what it is, right? So anyway, I think that if we ground ourselves as learners
Mm-hmm.
working together against a system that, well, was designed badly, honestly, right? I never want to say the system is broken. I just want to say the system's deeply flawed because I think there's some design flaws at play.
Absolutely.
Um, and I intentional.
Absolutely.
Right?
Especially with this current administration, these choice vouchers.
All this
Bullshit.
nonsense. But if we can lean into the relational signs and really try to meet folks where they're at,
Mm-hmm.
and really, not in an accusatory way, but in a like, what makes sense kind of way, and what can we try, and what feels plausible, and what can I do to support. And in all fairness, I'm running on limited bandwidth, you're probably running on limited bandwidth, my child is running on limited bandwidth. Like, how do we sort of piece together
Absolutely.
on fumes,
No,
you
but I
know
think what you get into is segues into a good closure for the episode, is keeping in mind that there are inclusive practices, right? Those are actions that you take. Inclusion is not a practice. Inclusion is something that has to be created, and it has different pieces to it, and it's multi-layered and it's multifaceted. And I think one of the things that we felt like was really missing and why we wanted to have this conversation was that, again, two things can be true. You can acknowledge those cracks and those breaks in the system. You can acknowledge those pieces that aren't quite fitting, and that are, quite honestly causing educators to leave in droves, right?
100%.
And you can also acknowledge that disabled learners deserve to have access to education and access to settings that can be adjusted with them in mind, if you're willing to humanize them and to learn from those that have become adults. Because that's what I always say, those disabled learners, many of them will become disabled adults, and they're looking back on their education, and they're looking back on their access, and they're looking back on what supports they didn't have, and they're becoming advocates. And so I think the big takeaway that we really want everyone to have is that inclusion is possible. True inclusion requires systemic change. And I have come across where I've seen that in settings, the way in which people have talked about classrooms and the teachers' approaches, but it took everyone. It takes administration and the educator and the paraprofessional and the parent to create these inclusive environments, and the related service providers. It takes everyone. And if you don't have all of those people, then you have to look at, where is my role and how can I incorporate an inclusive practice to make things more inclusive?
No, absolutely. And I mean, you said it so beautifully. I don't want to taint it with my words, but I mean, as you were talking, the last thing I'll say is that, like, yes, there is a legal responsibility, but to me, more importantly, there's just a collective humanity responsibility. There's a moral responsibility, right? We really, kids should be able to access meaningful learning environments, not just because the law says they have to, because to me, that just feels like a human right.
It is, in fact, a civil one.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where we will leave you on this one, because again, there is nuance to inclusion. And I think a big piece is keeping humanity in the forefront of that. And hopefully you either felt validated with this episode or you learned something new.
Absolutely.
Thank you again for joining us here in the Affirming Village. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff and Lisa Baskin-Wright, and we hope today's conversation leaves you feeling seen, supported, and better equipped to advocate for yourself or your learner. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone else in the village. Until next time, keep advocating, keep affirming, and keep building the village we all deserve.